On his 40th birthday, a son cruelly tells his mother she's never done anything for him. For his gift, she gives him a simple, old box filled with what he thinks is junk. He has no idea that box contains every receipt, every canceled check, and every secret sacrifice she ever made for him. A paper trail of a mother's love that is about to leave him speechless and on his knees. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. This is a story about how sometimes the quietest actions have the loudest results. Before we begin, please show your support by hitting that like button, subscribing, and clicking the notification bell, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The restaurant my son had chosen for his 40th birthday was the kind of place where the waiters wore starched white jackets and the water glasses were never empty. It was opulent, expensive, and a little soulless. But my son, Daniel, was in his element. He sat at the head of the table, flanked by his beautiful wife, Catherine, and a group of his successful, backslapping friends, soaking in their praise. I sat at the far end of the table, a quiet observer, my heart filled with a bittersweet pride. 40 years. It felt like only yesterday I was teaching him to tie his shoes, and now he was a man, a successful architect, a pillar of his community. As the expensive wine flowed, the conversation turned to Daniel's achievements. "I have to hand it to you, Dan," one of his friends said, raising a glass. "Building your firm from the ground up like you did, all on your own. It's truly impressive." Daniel beamed, puffing out his chest. "Well, you know," he said with a false air of humility, "when you don't have a safety net, you learn to fly or you fall. I had to do it all myself, every step of the way." I felt a small, sharp pang in my chest. All by himself? I thought of the long nights I had stayed up helping him with his college applications, the inheritance from his grandfather I had given him to use as seed money for his first office, the countless times I had bailed him out of financial trouble in those early years. But I said nothing. Tonight was his night. After the main course, the waiters brought out a towering chocolate cake, its surface ablaze with 40 tiny candles. We all sang. Daniel made a wish and blew out the flames to a round of applause. Then came the gifts. He received a gold watch, a weekend trip to a ski resort, a bottle of whiskey that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Then it was my turn. His friends looked on, a little curious. I reached down and placed my gift on the table. It was not a glossy box from a high-end store. It was an old, sturdy shoebox, its corners softened with age. Daniel stared at it, a look of confusion, then faint embarrassment crossing his face. "What's this, Mom?" he asked, his voice a little too loud. "I thought you might enjoy a little trip down memory lane," I said softly, "for your 40th. He gave a short, dismissive laugh, clearly embarrassed by my humble offering in front of his wealthy friends. He didn't open it. He just pushed it to the side of the table, next to a discarded breadbasket. It was then that his wife, Catherine, chose to ask an innocent but loaded question. "Susan," she said, "Dan was just telling us how he built his company all on his own. That must make you so proud." Before I could answer, Daniel jumped in. "It's true," he said, looking at me, his eyes hard. "And you know, Mom, I've been thinking about it. With all due respect, you never really did anything for me, not in the ways that truly counted. You never pushed me, you never had the connections I needed. Everything I have, I had to fight for myself." The table fell silent. The words, spoken with such casual cruelty, hung in the air. He had not just forgotten my contributions, he had erased them. He had erased my entire life as his mother. In front of his friends, on his birthday, he had rendered me utterly and completely useless. I didn't react. I didn't cry. I felt a strange, cold calm descend over me. I looked at him, this successful man my son had become, and I felt a profound sense of pity. He had rewritten his own history to make himself the sole hero of his story. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of forced conversation and awkward silences. When it was time to leave, Daniel picked up his expensive gifts, leaving the old shoebox on the table. "Aren't you forgetting something?" I asked quietly. He sighed, annoyed, and snatched up the box as an afterthought. He had no idea that the useless gift he held with such contempt contained the one thing that could shatter his self-made myth into a million pieces. I've only just begun this story, but believe me, it's about to get even more intense. Stay tuned to find out what happens when the hero faces an even greater injustice. I slept fitfully that night, my son's words, "You never really did anything for me," echoing in my quiet house. The insult was a poison, seeping into 40 years of memories and tainting every one of them. Every sacrifice, every quiet act of support, every prayer I'd ever offered up for his happiness, all of it erased in a single cruel sentence. I wasn't angry. I was heartbroken. The box I had given him was not a trap. It was not intended as revenge. It was simply the truth, a quiet collection of facts I had assembled over the years, a tangible history of my love for him. I had intended for it to be a nostalgic gift, a way for him to look back on his journey. Now, it would be something else entirely. It would be a judgment. I can only imagine the scene at his house the next morning. I picture him waking up late, a slight headache from the expensive wine, in his beautiful home that felt like a palace to him. He would see his new gifts piled on a table, the gold watch, the keys to a ski condo for a weekend, all symbols of the successful, self-made man he believed himself to be. And then he would see my gift, the old, unassuming shoebox, probably sitting by the trash, waiting to be thrown out with the rest of the party decorations. I imagine he wouldn't have opened it at all, if not for his wife, Catherine. "What's in the box from your mom?" she might have asked, her curiosity piqued by the strangeness of it. "Oh, nothing," he would have said with a wave of his hand. "Just some old junk, probably, sentimental stuff." But she would have insisted, and so, with a long-suffering sigh, he would have opened it, likely planning to glance at the contents for a moment before tossing them in the bin. But the contents weren't just sentimental stuff. Inside, there were no old photos or bronzed baby shoes. There were manila folders, dozens of them, each one neatly labeled by year, from his childhood to the present day. I picture him, a frown of confusion on his face, pulling out the first folder, labeled College, 1998 to 2001. Inside, not letters, but carbon copies of checks. Checks made out to his university for tuition payments, canceled checks for his dorm fees, receipts from the campus bookstore for hundreds of dollars in textbooks. He would have stared, confused. He had paid for college with student loans, hadn't he? Or so he'd always told himself. He would open another folder, First Apartment, 2003. Inside, the lease he had signed and a canceled check for $3,000 for the security deposit and first month's rent, signed in my familiar, neat script. He would have moved faster then, a cold, sick feeling beginning to bloom in his stomach. Folder after folder. First car, 2005. The loan document he thought his father had co-signed, but which clearly showed my name, and the payment stubs for the first 2 years of payments that I had made secretly to ease his burden. Business seed money, 2010, a copy of the wire transfer for $50,000 from my savings account. The money he had told everyone was from a small inheritance from my grandfather. And on it went. Medical bills, car repairs, a receipt for the engagement ring he had bought Catherine. Each piece of paper was a silent testament to a lifetime of support he had willfully ignored, a paper trail of the nothing I had done for him. I imagine him at the end, his hands trembling, his face pale. He would have reached the final folder, labeled Present Day. Inside would be just one document, a copy of the bank statement showing the final mortgage payment on the very house he was standing in, a payment I had made just last year as a silent 64th birthday gift and a 39th birthday gift to him, freeing him from his largest debt. He would stare at that final, devastating piece of paper, the proof that the very roof over his head was a product of my uselessness. And the words he had spoken with such casual cruelty at his birthday dinner would come rushing back, no longer a boast, but a damning indictment of his own staggering ignorance and ingratitude. I didn't have to imagine for long. My phone, which had been silent all night, lit up just after 8 a.m. the next morning. It was Daniel. A wave of voicemails followed, each one more frantic and broken than the last. Mom, please pick up. Mom, I opened the box. Oh God, I opened the box. Please, I need to talk to you. I'm coming over. I listened to the messages, my heart a heavy, aching stone in my chest. There was no anger in his voice, only the raw, ragged sound of a man whose entire world had been shattered. I sat in my quiet living room and waited. I knew he would come. The truth, once released, cannot be ignored. When my doorbell rang an hour later, the sound was soft, hesitant, almost fearful. It was a world away from the confident, boisterous man who had held court at his birthday party. I opened the door. He stood on my porch, looking like a ghost. His face was pale, his eyes were red and swollen, and he was holding a handful of the canceled checks from the box, his knuckles white. He looked as if he hadn't slept, as if he had spent the entire night wrestling with the ghosts of my sacrifices. He looked, for the first time in a very long time, like a little boy who was utterly lost. I saw them, he whispered, his voice cracking. The checks, the tuition payments, the down payment on my apartment, the car, Mom, the car. I thought Dad co-signed. He shook his head, a look of sickening disbelief on his face. And the house? You paid off the whole mortgage last year? He looked up at me, his eyes swimming with a shame so profound it was almost painful to witness. The whole time I was talking about being self-made, about doing it all myself, I was living a lie you funded, and I called you useless. The word hung in the air between us, ugly and unforgivable. He took a shaky step forward. Mom, he choked out, I am so sorry. It's the most disgusting thing I've ever said. I don't know why I said it. I guess I needed to believe it. It made me feel bigger, stronger, and it was all a fantasy. He held up the papers in his hand. This is real. All of this. You didn't just help me, you built my entire life, and I spat in your face. I looked at my son, this broken man, and the anger I had felt was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. I had never wanted to humiliate him. I had only ever wanted him to see the truth. Why did you need to feel bigger than me, Daniel? I asked softly. Why was my contribution something you had to erase? My question seemed to break him. It was the one thing he couldn't answer, the one truth about his own character he couldn't face. He didn't try to make excuses, he didn't try to explain. The shame was too great. He just looked at me, his face crumpling, a lifetime of unacknowledged love and unearned pride collapsing in on him all at once. The papers fluttered from his hand and scattered across my porch. And then, my son, my tall, successful 40-year-old son, sank to his knees right there on my welcome mat, his head in his hands, his body shaking with ragged, heartbroken sobs. He had finally, truly understood. I looked down at the broken man who was my son, kneeling on my welcome mat, and the last of my cold resolve melted away, replaced by a wave of profound maternal sorrow. This was not a victory, it was a tragedy. I had won the argument, but the cost was the complete and utter shattering of my child's sense of self. I stepped out onto the porch and put a hand on his shaking shoulder. "Get up, Daniel," I said softly. "Get up and come inside." He looked up at me, his face a mess of shame and tears, and allowed me to help him to his feet. He followed me into the kitchen like a lost child and sat at the small wooden table where he had eaten his breakfast every morning for 18 years. I didn't say a word. I just put the kettle on to boil and made him a strong, sweet cup of tea just the way he liked it when he was sick as a boy. We sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. He stared into his mug as if the answers to the universe were swirling in the dark liquid. Finally, he spoke, his voice hoarse and quiet. "All my friends," he began, "they all had these impressive fathers, CEOs, surgeons, men who built empires. They had stories of struggle, of making it. My dad was a good man, a wonderful man, but he was a quiet accountant. We had a comfortable life, but not a spectacular one." He shook his head. "I was always so desperate to have my own self-made story. I wanted to be the hero of my own life. So I just started telling myself that's what I was. I mentally erased every bit of help I ever got because it didn't fit the narrative I wanted for myself. When you were there, so quiet, so supportive, it was like you were a constant, silent reminder that my story wasn't true," he confessed, his voice cracking. And the more successful I became, the more I resented that reminder. I had to believe I did it all myself to feel like it was real. And on my birthday, when everyone was praising me, the self-made man, you were there, the one person who knew the truth. And I hated you for it in that moment. It was ugly and it was monstrous, but it's the truth. His confession was a raw, painful, and deeply human admission of his own profound insecurity. He hadn't called me useless because he truly believed it. He had called me useless because he desperately needed to believe it himself. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "Daniel," I said, my voice gentle, "my love for you was never meant to be a liability in your story. It was supposed to be your foundation. Your father and I, we didn't just want to give you money. We wanted to give you freedom. The freedom to pursue your dreams without the crushing weight of debt. The freedom to fail without losing everything. The freedom to build a life based on your passions, not your fears." I squeezed his hand. My support wasn't a secret because I wanted credit. It was a secret because I wanted you to feel like the hero. My only mistake was not realizing that my silence was allowing you to forget the most important part of any hero's journey, the people who helped them along the way. The tears that came to his eyes now were different. They weren't tears of shame, but of understanding. For the first time, we were talking, really talking, not as a mother and a son caught in old patterns, but as two adults grappling with a painful truth. He understood the depth of my love, and I understood the depth of his insecurity. The damage was immense, the wound deep, but for the first time, I felt like it could actually begin to heal. He stayed for another hour. When it was time for him to leave, he stood at the door and looked at me, a fragile hope in his eyes. "Mom," he said, "I know I have no right to ask, but can I come for dinner next Sunday? Not for a celebration. Not for anything special." He took a shaky breath. I want to hear your stories, the ones I was too busy to listen to before." I looked at my son, this new, broken, and more honest version of him, and I smiled a real smile. "I'd like that very much, Daniel," I said. "I'll make your favorite." The journey back would be long, but we had finally taken the first step. We are on the verge of the climax. What happens now will turn everything upside down. You simply cannot miss the resolution of this story. That Sunday, my house was filled with the warm, comforting scent of a slow-cooked beef stew, the meal I had always made for Daniel on special occasions. This was a new kind of special occasion. Not a birthday, not a holiday, but the first day of our new life. He arrived on time. Not with the swagger of a successful architect, but with the quiet humility of a son coming home. He brought me a simple bouquet of daisies from the farmer's market. "These made me think of the ones in your garden," he said softly. It was the most thoughtful gift he had ever given me. Dinner was different. For the first time in his adult life, Daniel asked questions. He didn't talk about his work, his friends, or his accomplishments. He asked about me. He asked about my childhood, about my dreams before I met his father. He asked me to tell him the story of how his father proposed, a story he had heard a dozen times but had never truly listened to. I talked, and he listened, his eyes focused on me, a look of genuine interest on his face. He was not just hearing the words, he was learning about the person he had called his mother for 40 years but had never really known. After we ate, as we sat with our cups of coffee, he finally broached the subject that hung in the air between us. "Mom," he said, his voice low, "the house, the money in the box. I can't accept it. It doesn't feel right. After what I said, it feels like a reward for being the worst kind of son imaginable. I need to give it back. I need to do it on my own, for real this time." He looked at me, his expression earnest and resolute. I reached across the table and put my hand on his. "Daniel, look at me," I said. "That money was never a reward. It was never a payment for your love or a prize to be won. It was a tool. Your father and I worked our entire lives to build a set of tools for you so that you could build whatever life you dreamed of without being crippled by the fear of failure or the burden of debt." I looked at him, my heart full. "You are right. You did misuse the tools. You used a hammer to break a window instead of building a wall. You have learned a very hard and very painful lesson about that. I see the man sitting in front of me now, and I know you will never make that mistake again." "The gift was never the money, sweetheart," I continued. "The gift was the freedom to become the man you were meant to be. The house is yours. The security is yours. It was given with love, and I will not tarnish that love by taking it back now." I gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "The only repayment I will ever ask for is that you use those tools to build a life of not just success, but of character. Be a good husband to Catherine. Be a man your father would have been proud of. Be the kind of person who doesn't need to diminish others to feel big." He looked at me, tears glistening in his eyes, and for the first time, he truly saw the gift for what it was. It wasn't a handout that undermined his accomplishments. It was a foundation, one that had been there all along, silently supporting him whether he acknowledged it or not. He nodded, unable to speak. The silence in the room was no longer tense or awkward. It was a peaceful, comfortable silence, filled with a new, hard-won understanding. My son had broken my heart, but in doing so, he had shattered his own false image of himself. And as we sat there together, we were finally ready to pick up the pieces and build something real, something better, together. The nothing I had done for him had turned out to be everything.